Berlin, April 1945. The city that once echoed with the triumphant roar of Nazi rallies now trembles under the thunder of Soviet artillery, and deep beneath the Reich Chancellery garden, in a concrete tomb 50 feet below ground, Adolf Hitler paces like a caged animal in what will become his final prison. The Führerbunker, as it's known, is a claustrophobic maze of 30 rooms spread across 2 levels, its walls thick enough to withstand the heaviest bombs, yet unable to keep out the truth that pounds closer with every passing hour. The 1,000-year Reich is dying, and it has barely lasted 12 years. Outside, the Red Army advances street by street, building by building, leaving behind them a trail of fire and vengeance. Inside, the man who once commanded armies stretching from the Atlantic to the Volga now commands only the loyalty of a dwindling group of fanatics, sycophants, and those too terrified to flee. It is here, in this underground warren of desperation, that one of history's most monstrous figures will spend his final days. And it is here that we must venture to understand not just how Hitler's story ended, but what those final days reveal about power, delusion, and the terrible price of absolute authority. The bunker itself tells a story before we even meet its inhabitants. Constructed in 2 phases, the older Führerbunker and the newer, deeper Führerbunker were connected by a narrow staircase that served as the only link between Hitler's private quarters and the outside world. The air inside is stale, recycled by failing ventilation systems that wheeze and rattle like the regime itself. Electric lights powered by a diesel generator cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, and the constant vibration of exploding shells above creates a perpetual low rumble that inhabitants compare to living inside a submarine under depth charge attack. Water seeps through cracks in the concrete, pooling on floors already littered with discarded papers, empty schnapps bottles, and the detritus of a collapsing government. The smell is a mixture of mildew, unwashed bodies, and the acrid chemical tang of explosives that somehow penetrates even here. This is where Hitler has chosen to make his final stand, not in some mountain fortress or escape to South America as conspiracy theorists would later claim, but here, beneath the ruins of his capital, surrounded by the wreckage of his dreams. To understand these final days, we must first understand how Hitler arrived at this moment, how the master of Europe in 1942 became the cornered rat of 1945. The journey from triumph to catastrophe is shorter than most tyrants imagine, and Hitler's path was particularly steep. Just 3 years earlier, Nazi Germany controlled virtually all of continental Europe. France had fallen in a humiliating 6-week campaign, Britain stood alone and besieged, and Hitler's armies were driving deep into the Soviet Union, reaching the outskirts of Moscow. The Führer's strategic genius, so lauded by his generals and propaganda machine, seemed unstoppable. Every gamble had paid off. Every prediction of doom from cautious advisors had been proven wrong. But hubris, that ancient Greek concept of pride before the fall, was already setting in. Hitler began to believe his own mythology, convinced that his will alone could bend reality to his desires. The turning points came in rapid succession: the failure to capture Moscow in December 1941, the entry of the United States into the war that same month, the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943, and the relentless bombing campaign that began to reduce German cities to rubble. By June 1944, when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the strategic situation was hopeless, though Hitler refused to see it. His generals knew the war was lost, his economic ministers knew production couldn't match Allied output, his intelligence services knew the Red Army was preparing a massive offensive, but the Führer would hear none of it. Anyone who suggested negotiation or retreat was denounced as a defeatist or traitor. Hitler had long ago surrounded himself with yes-men and true believers, purging the military of anyone with the independence to challenge his increasingly delusional directives. The July 20, 1944 assassination attempt, when Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb at Hitler's East Prussian headquarters, only deepened the Führer's paranoia and isolation. He survived the blast with minor injuries, interpreting this as proof of Providence protecting him for some great destiny, never considering that perhaps fate was simply prolonging his suffering. In the months following the assassination attempt, Hitler's health deteriorated visibly. This once dynamic speaker who could hold audiences spellbound for hours now shuffled when he walked, his left hand trembling with what was likely Parkinson's disease. His face puffy and gray from the cocktail of drugs administered daily by his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell. Morell, a quack beloved by Hitler and despised by everyone else, injected the Führer with a bewildering array of substances. Vitamins, hormones, glucose, amphetamines, and even compounds containing strychnine and atropine. Whether these treatments helped or hastened Hitler's decline remains debated, but there's no question that by early 1945, the man in the bunker was a physical wreck, subject to violent mood swings, insomnia, and increasingly divorced from reality. By January 1945, the Red Army had launched its final offensive, smashing through German lines in Poland and driving toward Berlin at terrifying speed. Hitler, against all military logic, refused to leave the capital, moving permanently into the bunker on January 16th. His staff pleaded with him to relocate to the Berghof, his mountain retreat in Bavaria, or to some more defensible position, but Hitler insisted that he would stay in Berlin, lead the defense personally, and either achieve victory or die in the ruins. This wasn't courage, but rather the fatalism of a man who knew his crimes were too great for any mercy, who understood that capture meant trial, humiliation, and execution. The bunker's permanent residents formed a strange cross-section of Nazi Germany's final act. There was Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and party chancellor, a thuggish bureaucrat who controlled access to the Führer and used this power to settle scores and advance his own position. There was Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, a true fanatic who had followed Hitler since the earliest days and would follow him to the very end, bringing his wife Magda and their 6 young children to die in the bunker rather than live in a world without National Socialism. There was General Wilhelm Burgdorf, the army's personnel chief, a heavy drinker who spent these final days in an alcoholic haze. There was General Hans Krebs, the chief of staff, a competent officer trapped by loyalty and circumstance into serving a madman. There were the SS guards, fanatically loyal to the end, and the secretaries, young women like Traudl Junge and Gerda Christian, who typed Hitler's endless stream of orders, directives, and increasingly incoherent messages to military units that no longer existed. And there was Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime mistress, kept hidden from the German public for years, who insisted on joining him in the bunker despite his orders that she leave Berlin. Her presence added a surreal domestic element to this tomb, as she tried to maintain normalcy with parties, champagne, and small talk while the world burned overhead. The daily routine in the bunker followed a rhythm dictated by Hitler's nocturnal habits and the twice-daily military briefings that marked time like a countdown clock. Hitler typically woke around noon, took his lunch at 2 p.m., attended the first military briefing at 3 p.m., had dinner around 8 p.m., and then presided over the second briefing at midnight, often not retiring until 4 or 5 a.m. These briefings, held in the bunker's small conference room, became increasingly nightmarish affairs as the military situation deteriorated. Generals would shuffle in with their maps and reports, forced to brief a man who had lost touch with reality, who ordered non-existent divisions to attack, who flew into rages when told that his commands were impossible to execute. Hitler would hover over the map table, his reading glasses perched on his nose, moving colored pins representing armies that existed only on paper, planning offensives with troops who had no ammunition, fuel, or will to fight. When confronted with bad news, his reaction ranged from icy silence to volcanic fury. He accused his generals of cowardice, betrayal, and incompetence, never accepting that perhaps his own decisions had led Germany to this disaster. The bunker's atmosphere grew more toxic with each passing day as the Soviet noose tightened. By mid-April, the Red Army had reached the outskirts of Berlin, and the sounds of artillery fire were constant. No longer distant thunder, but immediate cracks and booms that shook dust from the ceiling and made conversations difficult. On April 16th, Marshal Georgy Zhukov launched the final assault on Berlin with a bombardment so intense that it registered on seismographs in Switzerland. Over 20,000 artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously, turning the sky red and announcing that the end was near. Hitler's response was to issue orders for a counterattack by SS General Felix Steiner's army group, a force that existed largely in the Führer's imagination. When told that Steiner's attack hadn't materialized because Steiner didn't have enough troops, Hitler erupted in what witnesses described as his most spectacular breakdown of the war. On April 22nd, during the afternoon briefing, Hitler finally confronted the truth he had been denying for months. When informed that Steiner's attack had never taken place and that Soviet forces were now in the suburbs of Berlin, Hitler began screaming that he had been betrayed by everyone, that the war was lost, that he would remain in Berlin and shoot himself when the time came. His staff stood frozen as the Führer ranted for nearly half an hour, his face purple with rage, spittle flying from his mouth, his body shaking with emotion. Finally, exhausted, he collapsed into a chair and announced that the war was lost, that anyone who wanted to leave could leave, but that he would stay and die in Berlin. This admission, this crack in Hitler's facade of invincibility, sent shockwaves through the bunker. Suddenly, the pretense was over, and everyone had to confront their own mortality and choices. Goebbels, ever the true believer, announced that he and his family would stay and die with the Führer. Bormann desperately tried to convince Hitler to leave Berlin, suggesting various escape plans that Hitler dismissed with weary contempt. Many of the military staff began making plans to flee, though they had to do so carefully to avoid accusations of desertion. The SS guards remained fanatically loyal, executing anyone they caught trying to escape without proper authorization. Outside the bunker, Berlin was dying. The Soviets attacked with overwhelming force, using tanks, artillery, and flamethrowers to clear each building, each room, each basement. German defenders, a desperate mix of regular army, SS, Hitler Youth, and old men from the Volkssturm Home Guard, fought with the courage of those who knew defeat meant death or worse. The Red Army's rage, fueled by years of Nazi atrocities in the Soviet Union, manifested in an orgy of violence, looting, and revenge. Civilians huddled in cellars, subway tunnels, and bomb shelters, caught between the hammer of Soviet assault and the anvil of Nazi fanaticism that shot anyone who suggested surrender. The city became a vision of hell, buildings collapsing into streets already choked with rubble, corpses hanging from lampposts where SS execution squads had left them as warnings against defeatism, fires spreading unchecked through neighborhoods that had stood for centuries. And yet, in the bunker, a strange alternate reality persisted. Eva Braun organized a birthday party for one of Hitler's favorite secretaries, serving champagne and playing phonograph records of popular music, dancing in her private room while Soviet shells landed in the Chancellery garden above. Hitler spent hours discussing his German Shepherd Blondie, worrying about the dog's health and comfort even as millions of his subjects suffered and died. He dictated long political testaments justifying his actions, blaming everyone but himself for Germany's defeat, and expounding on his racial theories as if posterity would vindicate him. The disconnect between the bunker's cocoon and the reality outside became almost total. When General Helmuth Weidling, the commander of Berlin's defense, reported that the city could hold out perhaps another 2 days, Hitler nodded as if this was acceptable, as if some miracle might still arrive. On April 28th, news reached the bunker that shattered even Hitler's carefully maintained delusions. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS, Hitler's most loyal lieutenant and architect of the Holocaust, had been attempting to negotiate a surrender with the Western Allies through Swedish intermediary Count Folke Bernadotte. When Hitler learned of this betrayal, he flew into a rage that eclipsed even his April 22nd breakdown. Himmler's treachery, as Hitler saw it, was the final proof that everyone had betrayed him, that he had been surrounded by cowards and traitors who lacked his strength and vision. In his fury, Hitler ordered Himmler arrested and executed, though of course, Himmler was far from Berlin and beyond Hitler's reach. The Führer did have Himmler's representative in the bunker, SS General Hermann Fegelein, dragged from his apartment where he'd been caught trying to escape wearing civilian clothes. Fegelein, who was married to Eva Braun's sister, was taken to the Chancellery garden and shot on Hitler's orders, a last exercise of the power that was slipping away hour by hour. This betrayal by Himmler seemed to crystallize Hitler's decision about his own fate. If Himmler, of all people, had turned traitor, then there was no one left to trust, no reason to continue. That same evening, April 28th, Hitler decided to marry Eva Braun, perhaps as a reward for her loyalty, perhaps as a final gesture of normalcy in the chaos. A municipal official named Walter Wagner, who happened to be fighting in a nearby Volkssturm unit, was found and brought to the bunker to perform a civil ceremony. Just after midnight on April 29th, in the bunker's small map room, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun were married in a brief ceremony witnessed by Goebbels and Bormann. Both bride and groom had to formally state that they were of pure Aryan descent and free of hereditary diseases, even here, even now, maintaining the racial fiction that had cost millions their lives. Eva signed the register as Eva Braun, starting to write her maiden name before crossing it out and writing Eva Hitler, a name she would bear for less than 40 hours. After the ceremony, Hitler retired to his private room with his secretaries and dictated his last will and testament, two documents that revealed the depths of his self-delusion and inability to accept responsibility. In his political testament, he blamed the Jews for starting the war, praised the German people for their sacrifices, expelled Himmler and Göring from the Nazi Party for their betrayals, and appointed Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. In his personal will, he explained his decision to marry Eva Braun and die with her in Berlin, distributed his personal possessions to loyal subordinates, and appointed Martin Bormann as executor. These documents, typed by Traudl Junge, who years later would express her shame at having served Hitler, were witnessed and signed in the early morning hours of April 29th, Hitler's last official acts as Führer. The final day, April 30th, 1945, dawned gray and smoky over Berlin. Soviet forces were now within blocks of the Chancellery, their artillery firing directly into the building above the bunker. Inside, an eerie calm had descended. Hitler's decision was made, the paperwork completed, and now only the execution remained. Hitler spent the morning saying goodbye to staff members, shaking hands with a line of secretaries, guards, and remaining officials who filed past him in the narrow corridor. Witnesses reported that he seemed almost relieved, as if a burden had been lifted, his hand no longer trembling as severely as it had in recent days. Around noon, Hitler and Eva took lunch with his secretaries and Traudl Junge. The conversation was small talk about dogs and banalities, everyone carefully avoiding any mention of what was about to happen. After lunch, around 2:30 p.m., Hitler and Eva retired to his private quarters, a small suite consisting of a bedroom and sitting room furnished spartanly with a desk, couch, and a few chairs. Eva wore a blue dress with white trim at the neck and cuffs, Hitler his usual uniform. They said their final goodbyes to Goebbels, Bormann, and a few others waiting outside the door, then closed the door behind them. What happened next in that room has been reconstructed from physical evidence and the testimony of those who discovered the bodies. Hitler sat on the couch, Eva beside him. She took a cyanide capsule, biting down on the glass vial that released the poison. Hitler, perhaps not trusting the poison alone or perhaps wanting to ensure a quick death, bit his cyanide capsule and simultaneously shot himself in the right temple with his Walther pistol. The shot, though muffled by the bunker's thick walls, was heard by those waiting outside. After a few minutes of tense silence, Hitler's valet Heinz Ling and others entered to find Hitler slumped on the couch, a small stream of blood running from his temple, the smell of burnt almonds from the cyanide mixing with cordite from the gunshot. Eva had died beside him, showing no external signs of injury, the cyanide having killed her quickly. The scene, described by witnesses, was strangely peaceful. Hitler looked relaxed in death, the tension that had marked his final months gone from his face, while Eva appeared to have simply fallen asleep. But there was no time for contemplation. Hitler had left specific orders that his body was to be burned, that he would not become a trophy for the Soviets as Mussolini's corpse had become for Italian partisans just days earlier. Ling and others quickly wrapped both bodies in blankets and carried them up the 4 flights of stairs to the emergency exit leading to the Chancellery garden. Even this simple task was dangerous, as Soviet artillery was shelling the area and snipers were active. The bodies were placed in a shallow crater from a recent shell strike, doused with gasoline from jerry cans that had been stockpiled for this purpose, and set alight. Witnesses standing at the bunker entrance watched as the flames consumed Adolf Hitler and Eva Hitler, the fire fed by repeated applications of gasoline throughout the afternoon. The cremation was incomplete. There wasn't enough fuel or time to fully reduce the bodies to ash, and the constant shelling made the process hasty and incomplete. Around 6 p.m., with Soviet forces even closer and the shelling intensifying, the partially burned remains were buried in another shell crater and covered with earth. Meanwhile, back in the bunker, the remaining inhabitants faced their own choices. Goebbels, true to his word, prepared to follow Hitler in death, but first, he and Magda carried out an act of unspeakable horror that reveals the full depths of Nazi fanaticism. Their 6 children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Heidi, ranging in age from 4 to 12, were poisoned by cyanide on the evening of May 1st. Whether Magda administered the poison herself or had an SS doctor do it remains disputed, but the result was the same: 6 innocent children murdered by their parents' ideology. The next evening, May 1st, after learning that Soviet forces were literally at the bunker's doorstep, Joseph and Magda Goebbels walked up to the garden, where an SS guard shot them both at their request. Their bodies were also burned, though like Hitler's, incompletely. Bormann, refusing to surrender, attempted to escape Berlin with a group of others on the night of May 1st, trying to break through Soviet lines under cover of darkness. He didn't make it far, either killed by Soviet fire or taking cyanide when captured, his body not definitively identified until the 1970s when construction workers discovered skeletal remains near the bunker that DNA testing confirmed were his. Most of the remaining bunker inhabitants either attempted to flee or surrendered to the Soviets in the early hours of May 2nd, when General Weidling officially capitulated. The war in Europe would continue for a few more days, but effectively, Hitler's death marked the end of the Third Reich. The discovery of Hitler's death was not immediate. Soviet forces entering the bunker on May 2nd found it largely abandoned, littered with documents, empty champagne bottles, and the detritus of the regime's final hours. They found the bodies of the Goebbels children laid out on beds in their room, a sight that shocked even hardened Soviet soldiers. They found Goebbels and his wife's charred remains in the garden, and they found what they believed were Hitler's remains, though the identification would be confused and controversial for years. Stalin, paranoid and suspicious, refused to believe Hitler was dead, suggesting instead that the Nazi leader had escaped to Spain or Argentina. This deliberate ambiguity served Stalin's purposes, allowing him to suggest that the Western Allies were harboring Hitler, and it fed decades of conspiracy theories. The Soviet autopsy of the remains they believed were Hitler's was not made public until 1968, and even then, doubts persisted. The Soviets kept portions of Hitler's skull and jawbone, which were stored in Moscow archives and only examined by Western researchers decades later. DNA testing in recent years has confirmed that these remains are indeed Hitler's, putting to rest the more outlandish escape theories, though conspiracy theorists continue to this day to suggest alternative scenarios. But the overwhelming evidence, from multiple witness testimonies, physical evidence, and forensic analysis, confirms what happened in that bunker on April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler, recognizing that his empire had collapsed and unwilling to face justice for his crimes, chose suicide over capture. The discovery of the bunker by journalists and investigators in the immediate post-war period revealed a time capsule of the regime's final madness. They found Hitler's personal quarters, spartanly furnished but containing his personal effects, uniforms, eyeglasses, medicines, a portrait of Frederick the Great that Hitler had kept as inspiration. They found the conference room where Hitler had presided over those final briefings, the map table still covered with outdated maps and documents. They found Eva Braun's room, where she had kept her fashionable wardrobe and cosmetics, maintaining vanity until the end. They found the storage rooms filled with supplies that couldn't save the regime: canned food, wine, ammunition, and fuel. They found the generator room where the diesel engines had kept the lights on and the air circulating. They found the telephone switchboard from which Hitler had attempted to command armies that no longer existed, and they found the radio room that had brought news of the outside world into this tomb. Most haunting, they found the ordinary signs of human habitation. Dishes in the kitchen, books left open, letters started but never finished, photographs of better times pinned to concrete walls, all frozen at the moment when the inhabitants fled or died. The physical bunker itself survived the war, though Soviet forces tried to demolish it. The structure was too solid, and instead, they sealed the entrances and buried it. Over the decades, various attempts were made to explore, demolish, or preserve the site, each reflecting changing attitudes toward Nazi history. The East German government, keen to erase physical reminders of the Nazi era, covered the area with apartments and parking lots. Most of the bunker remains buried today beneath a parking lot in central Berlin, unmarked except for a small information board that gives minimal details. This deliberate obscurity reflects a conscious decision not to create a pilgrimage site for neo-Nazis, a concern that still influences how Germany deals with Nazi-era structures. The question that haunts any examination of Hitler's final days is not just what happened, but why anyone stayed loyal to the end. How could Goebbels murder his children rather than let them live in a post-Nazi world? How could military officers continue to follow orders from a madman even as those orders sent soldiers to pointless deaths? The answers lie in the psychology of totalitarianism and the cult of personality that Hitler had carefully cultivated. For true believers like Goebbels, National Socialism wasn't just a political system but a religious faith, and Hitler was its prophet. To live without it would be meaningless, and to allow his children to be raised under another system would be worse than death. For Eva Braun, her identity was so wrapped up in her relationship with Hitler that she couldn't conceive of existence without him. Her letters and diary entries reveal a woman who defined herself entirely through her connection to the Führer, who endured years of neglect and being hidden from public view because those rare moments of attention from Hitler made it worthwhile. For the military officers, a combination of oath-bound loyalty, fear of punishment, and cognitive dissonance kept them serving. They had taken oaths to Hitler personally, not to Germany, and German military culture placed enormous emphasis on honor and duty. Moreover, many were so implicated in war crimes that they knew surrender might mean trial and execution. Better to die fighting, they reasoned, than face justice. The bunker period also reveals Hitler's complete failure as a leader in crisis. Rather than taking responsibility for Germany's defeat, he blamed everyone else. The generals for incompetence, the German people for weakness, the Jews for starting the war. His final testament is a document of breathtaking self-delusion, portraying himself as a man of peace forced into war, a victim of conspiracies rather than the architect of catastrophe. There's no recognition that his decisions to invade the Soviet Union, declare war on the United States, and pursue genocide had brought Germany to ruin. This inability to accept reality, to adapt to changing circumstances, or to consider the welfare of those he led marks Hitler as not just evil but also spectacularly incompetent. A competent leader would have sought terms before the situation became hopeless, would have prioritized the nation's survival over personal ideology, would have died trying to save something rather than destroying everything in a tantrum of wounded pride. Instead, in his final months, Hitler issued orders that made Germany's suffering worse. He ordered a scorched earth policy, demanding that infrastructure be destroyed so the Allies couldn't use it, effectively condemning the German people to starvation and hardship. When Albert Speer, his armaments minister, quietly sabotaged these orders, Hitler never noticed, so disconnected was he from reality. Hitler also refused to allow civilian evacuations from eastern Germany, insisting that the presence of civilians would stiffen military resistance, a decision that condemned millions to Soviet occupation and its aftermath. His last radio address to the German people, broadcast on January 30th, 1945, promised victory through new wonder weapons and unbreakable will. Empty words that convinced no one but himself. The bunker days stripped away any remaining veneer of the mighty Führer, revealing a broken man, physically ill, mentally unstable, sustained by drugs and delusion. The contrast with the vigorous leader of propaganda films couldn't be starker. The historical impact of those final days in the bunker extends far beyond Hitler's personal story. His suicide ensured that there would be no trial, no public accounting for his crimes in the way that surviving Nazi leaders faced at Nuremberg. Some historians argue this was a final act of cowardice, robbing his victims of justice. Others suggest that Hitler's trial would have given him a platform for propaganda and martyrdom that his suicide denied him. His death created a vacuum in Nazi leadership that led to immediate and total collapse. Dönitz, his designated successor, held nominal authority for just over a week before Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945. The complete nature of Germany's defeat, with no government in exile or continuing resistance, made the Allied occupation and denazification possible in ways that might not have been if Nazi leadership had escaped to continue the fight from abroad. Hitler's bunker death also became a powerful symbol in post-war culture, representing the inevitable fate of totalitarian dictators who wage aggressive war. It features in countless books, documentaries, and films, serving as a cautionary tale about hubris, fanaticism, and the dangers of unchecked power. The image of Hitler trapped in his bunker, the world collapsing around him, has become shorthand for political defeat and the end of tyranny. The bunker also serves as a historical source of unprecedented value. The documents found there, the testimony of survivors, and the physical space itself provide insights into how Nazi Germany functioned at the highest level and how it fell apart. We know details about Hitler's daily routine, his health, his relationships, and his decision-making that we might not know for any other historical figure. The bunker period is possibly the most documented 2 weeks of one person's life in human history, examined from every angle by historians, psychologists, and military analysts. The testimonies of survivors like Traudl Junge, who later expressed profound regret for her service to Hitler, provide first-hand accounts that bring the bunker's atmosphere to life. Junge's memoirs, and her interviews later in life, reveal the cognitive dissonance of working for a monster while seeing him as a kindly, grandfatherly figure who remembered birthdays and asked about personal problems. These accounts remind us that even the most evil regimes are composed of ordinary people who make choices, who rationalize, who compartmentalize, and who must eventually face what they've done or been part of. The physical fate of Hitler's remains adds a final chapter to this story. After the Soviet autopsy, what remained of Hitler's body was buried and exhumed several times as the Soviets moved it to prevent it from being discovered and becoming a shrine. Finally, in 1970, the KGB exhumed the remains one last time from their burial site in Magdeburg, East Germany, cremated them completely, and scattered the ashes in a river. Only the jawbone and skull fragments were kept in Moscow archives. This final erasure was meant to prevent any physical remains from becoming objects of veneration for Nazi sympathizers, consistently refused to mark the site prominently, fearing it would attract neo-Nazi pilgrimage. The small information board erected in 2006 gives minimal information and was itself controversial. Some argued any marker was too much, while others felt history required acknowledgement. The parking lot that covers most of the bunker site is deliberately mundane, just another piece of urban infrastructure in a city that has worked hard to memorialize Nazi victims while avoiding glorification of perpetrators. This tension between remembering history and preventing its misuse is central to how Germany has dealt with its Nazi past, and the bunker is perhaps the most charged site in this ongoing negotiation. The lessons from Hitler's last days extend beyond the historical specifics to broader questions about leadership, accountability, and human psychology. We see how a leader's refusal to accept reality can multiply suffering, how ideological fanaticism can lead people to commit atrocities, how personal loyalty can override moral judgment, and how systems of authority can trap even those who recognize they're serving evil. The bunker period demonstrates that evil isn't always grandiose or epic. Sometimes it's banal, petty, and pathetic, taking place in dingy rooms by flickering lights, executed by tired people who've stopped thinking clearly. It shows us that tyrants, stripped of their power and propaganda, are just people, subject to the same fears, pains, and mortality as everyone else, and that their deaths, however dramatic, don't undo the harm they've caused. The stories of those who survived the bunker reveal the long shadow cast by those days. Secretaries like Traudl Junge spent decades processing their complicity, grappling with how they served evil without recognizing it at the time. Junge famously said she couldn't forgive herself for not questioning what was happening, for being young and thoughtless when thoughtfulness might have made a difference. Her later work as a witness to history was perhaps her attempt at redemption, though she never claimed to have achieved it. Others who left the bunker in those final days carried secrets and traumas that shaped the rest of their lives. Some, like many of the military officers, were tried at Nuremberg or later tribunals, facing legal accountability for their service to Hitler. Some escaped justice entirely, either dying in the chaos of Germany's collapse or successfully reinventing themselves in the post-war world. The fact that some bunker survivors evaded responsibility remains a source of frustration for those who believe in historical justice. The immediate aftermath of the bunker's fall also reveals the savage nature of the war's end. Soviet soldiers entering the Chancellery and bunker complex engaged in an orgy of looting, taking everything from Hitler's silverware to random documents, some of which surfaced decades later in private collections or archives. The area around the bunker saw brutal close-quarters combat as SS units fought to the last man. Even after Hitler's death, out of misplaced loyalty or simple inability to accept that the war was over, civilians trapped in the area suffered terribly, caught between fanatical defenders and vengeful attackers. The stories of Berlin civilians in those final days of April and early May 1945 are harrowing tales of survival against impossible odds, of people hiding in cellars while battles raged above, of families separated and traumatized by the violence. The bunker, designed to protect Hitler from bombs, couldn't protect him from the consequences of his own decisions. That's perhaps the ultimate irony of those final days. As we reflect on Hitler's end, we must also reflect on the end of those he victimized. While Hitler died quickly by his own hand, at a time of his choosing, millions of his victims had no such choices. The Jews, Roma, Slavs, disabled people, political prisoners, and countless others murdered in the Holocaust died in gas chambers by firing squad, through starvation and disease in concentration camps, subject to medical experiments, worked to death in slave labor. Their deaths were neither quick nor chosen, and they had no opportunity to escape justice because they had committed no crimes. The contrast between Hitler's relatively easy death and the suffering of his victims is morally stark. It's why many find his suicide unsatisfying as an ending, feeling that he escaped appropriate punishment. Yet we must also recognize that Hitler's final days, trapped in a concrete tomb of his own making, unable to escape the consequences of his actions, watching his dreams crumble, is its own form of justice. He died knowing he had failed, knowing his 1,000-year Reich would not last even 15 years, knowing that history would judge him not as the great leader he imagined himself to be, but as one of humanity's greatest monsters. He died friendless, trusted by no one and trusting no one. His body destined to be burned and scattered. His legacy nothing but ash and horror. In that sense, his end was fitting. The bunker today, buried beneath a parking lot, is perhaps the perfect metaphor for how Hitler's legacy should be treated. Acknowledged but not elevated, studied but not celebrated, remembered as a warning rather than venerated as history. The deliberate obscurity of the site reflects a mature understanding that some historical locations are important precisely because they remind us of what must never happen again, not because they commemorate something worth remembering fondly. The bunker is anti-monument, a place whose very hiddenness speaks volumes about what it represents. For visitors to Berlin today who seek the bunker location, they find only that parking lot and information board, forcing them to use their imagination to reconstruct what happened below. This act of imagination, of visualizing evil in ordinary space, is perhaps more powerful than any preserved site could be. It reminds us that atrocities don't happen in special evil places, but in spaces that could be anywhere, committed by people who could be anyone, prevented only by the conscious choice to do what's right when it's easier to do nothing or to follow orders. The final lesson of Hitler's bunker days is perhaps the most important. That absolute power corrupts absolutely, that leaders unchecked by accountability and surrounded by sycophants will lead their nations to ruin, that ideology divorced from reality ends in disaster, and that the price of tyranny is paid not by the tyrant alone but by millions of innocents. Hitler's end in that bunker. Solute power, who would suppress dissent, who would scapegoat minorities, who would lead through fear rather than consent. The bunker is where such paths inevitably lead, to a concrete tomb beneath a destroyed city, to a legacy of ash and horror, to a name synonymous with evil. As we close this examination of Hitler's final days, we must carry forward not just the historical details but the moral imperative they create. To remember is to resist repetition, to study evil is to armor ourselves against it. To understand how ordinary people became complicit in extraordinary crimes is to recognize our own capacity for both evil and resistance to it. The bunker story is not just about Hitler's end, but about how nations, societies, and individuals can descend into darkness, and about the terrible cost of that descent measured in millions of lives destroyed, cultures shattered, and a continent left in ruins. The ruins above Hitler's bunker have been rebuilt into modern Berlin, a vibrant democratic capital that has confronted its past rather than burying it, that memorializes victims rather than perpetrators, that educates rather than glorifies. This transformation from the capital of Nazi evil to a symbol of democratic renewal is perhaps the most powerful repudiation of everything Hitler stood for. The grass and trees growing in the park above the bunker site, children playing where Nazi guards once stood, the ordinary bustle of city life carrying on oblivious to the horror that unfolded 50 feet below, all testify to history's judgment. Hitler lost, his ideology died with him in that bunker, and the world he tried to create was stillborn in those concrete rooms. Time has rendered its verdict. The 1,000-year Reich lasted 12 years and died in a bunker, while the values Hitler tried to destroy, democracy, human rights, individual dignity, tolerance, have grown stronger in the decades since his death. That is the ultimate story of Hitler's last days, not just of how a dictator died, but of how the evil he represented was defeated, buried, and replaced with something better, and why we must remain vigilant to ensure it stays buried, hidden beneath parking lots and memory, studied but never celebrated, remembered as a warning that we ignore at our peril. The psychological dimensions of Hitler's bunker existence reveal layers of delusion that deepen with each passing hour. Medical records and eyewitness accounts describe a man who has become a grotesque parody of his former self, his body failing as spectacularly as his military campaigns, his mind retreating into fantasy worlds where victory remains possible through sheer force of will. Dr. Morell's medical diary, discovered after the war, catalogs an astounding pharmacological regimen that would challenge even modern medical understanding. Hitler received injections up to 5 times daily, including a mixture called Vitamultin that contained methamphetamine, Eucadol, which was essentially oxycodone, and various hormone preparations that Morell claimed would restore the Führer's vitality, but instead likely accelerated his physical and mental decline. The tremor in Hitler's left hand, visible in late war footage and confirmed by bunker witnesses, suggests either Parkinson's disease or drug-induced neurological damage, possibly both working in concert to destroy his motor control. His shuffling gait, stooped posture, and tendency to drag his left leg created a shocking contrast with the vigorous leader of propaganda films from just years earlier. Eva Braun's letters describe how Hitler aged decades in mere months, his hair turning completely gray, his skin taking on a waxy, unhealthy pallor, and his eyes losing the hypnotic intensity that had once held audiences spellbound. The Führer's diet deteriorated along with everything else. Once a strict vegetarian who lectured dinner guests on the evils of meat consumption, Hitler in the bunker ate sporadically and without enthusiasm, picking at meals prepared by his cook, often subsisting on cake and sweets that his secretaries provided. Sleep became increasingly elusive despite or perhaps because of the stimulants Morel provided. Hitler would pace the bunker corridors at 3 a.m., startling guards and staff, sometimes stopping to deliver impromptu monologues about betrayal, fate, and his place in history to anyone unfortunate enough to encounter him during these nocturnal wanderings. His personal hygiene, once fastidiously maintained, declined noticeably. The man who had demanded perfect grooming from his subordinates now sometimes appeared at briefings unshaven, his uniform rumpled, his legendary attention to appearance surrendered to more pressing concerns about survival. The bunker's daily routine, rigid despite the chaos outside, provided a framework that helped inhabitants maintain sanity in an insane situation. Meals were served at precise times, briefings held on schedule, and various small rituals observed as if normalcy could be willed into existence through repetition. The kitchen staff, working in the bunker's cramped galley, continued to prepare elaborate meals even as food supplies dwindled and the relevance of such efforts became questionable. They cooked for a government that was ceasing to exist, following menus and protocols designed for a functioning state now reduced to a few dozen people in a concrete box. The telephone switchboard, once connecting Hitler to commanders across Europe, now mostly received reports of defeat, retreat, and disintegration. The operators, young women trained in communications protocol, found themselves increasingly relaying messages that contradicted Hitler's orders or reported the destruction of units he had commanded to attack. The radio room brought news from the outside world that the bunker's inhabitants could scarcely process. BBC broadcasts announced Allied advances, described the liberation of concentration camps with details that even hardened Nazis found disturbing, and speculated about Hitler's fate with a casualness that enraged those listening. The contrast between the radio's descriptions of a world moving on from Nazism and the bunker's continued adherence to Nazi ritual and hierarchy created cognitive dissonance that some inhabitants resolved through deeper fanaticism while others began quietly planning escape. The arrival of new people in the bunker during those final weeks brought fresh perspectives that often clashed with the established unreality. Military officers arriving from the front lines to brief Hitler would describe catastrophic situations with the blunt honesty of men who knew they were likely going to die anyway, only to be met with Hitler's insistence that victory remained achievable if only his orders were followed correctly. These officers, many of them experienced combat veterans who had witnessed the evolution of the war from triumph to disaster, found themselves in the surreal position of arguing with a delusional commander-in-chief who inhabited a strategic fantasy world disconnected from battlefield reality. Some attempted to inject realism into the briefings, carefully presenting facts in ways that might penetrate Hitler's denial, while others simply provided the optimistic assessments they knew Hitler wanted to hear, recognizing that truth served no purpose when the listener refused to accept it. The younger officers and enlisted men assigned to the bunker as guards or support staff often arrived with some remnant of Nazi idealism intact, believing the propaganda about wonder weapons and inevitable victory, only to have that faith eroded by daily exposure to the dysfunction and desperation of Hitler's inner circle. These young men, many of them teenagers drafted in Germany's final levy en masse, witnessed their supposed leaders drinking heavily, arguing among themselves, and preparing escape plans while publicly proclaiming their determination to fight to the last. The education and cynicism they received in those weeks would shape their post-war testimonies and their understanding of authority and ideology. The presence of Eva Braun in the bunker introduced an element of domesticity that made the surreal situation even more bizarre. Here was Hitler's longtime mistress, a woman kept hidden from the German public for over a decade, suddenly visible and acknowledged, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy through feminine touches like fresh flowers when obtainable, attention to fashion and appearance, and the organization of social gatherings that felt like parties at a funeral. Eva's insistence on joining Hitler in the bunker, against his direct orders that she flee to safety, reveals something about her psychology that historians continue to debate. Was it genuine love, so complete that death with Hitler seemed preferable to life without him? Or was it a more complex mixture of codependency, investment in her identity as Hitler's partner, and perhaps even a theatrical sense of how her loyalty would be remembered? Her letters to friends describe her decision in romantic terms, positioning herself as the faithful woman standing by her man when all others have fled, but they also reveal awareness that this choice will define her historical legacy, that dying with Hitler will ensure she is remembered rather than forgotten as she had been for years. Eva's interactions with other bunker inhabitants show a woman trying to maintain normalcy and even gaiety in impossible circumstances. She organized a birthday party for Hitler's secretary Gerda Christian, complete with champagne and music, dancing in her private room while the world collapsed outside. She spent hours on her appearance, maintaining her blonde hair, makeup, and fashionable wardrobe, as if these rituals could preserve some zone of civilization in the barbarism. Witnesses describe her as often being the most cheerful person in the bunker, smiling and making small talk, creating an atmosphere of determined normalcy that some found comforting and others found deeply unsettling given the context. Her relationship with Hitler in these final days became more visible to staff than it had ever been previously. They were seen walking together in the bunker corridors, Hitler's hand on her arm, engaging in quiet conversations that seemed almost like normal couple interaction, a stark contrast to the years when Eva had been hidden away, forbidden from appearing in public with the Führer. The wedding ceremony on April 29th legitimized this relationship in its final hours, a gesture that seemed simultaneously romantic and pointless. What did marriage mean when both parties planned to die within days, when the state issuing the marriage certificate was dissolving, when there would be no future together? Yet the ceremony proceeded with surprising formality. Wagner, the civil official brought from his combat post to perform his bureaucratic duty, the witnesses signing documents that would survive the couple they commemorated, everyone playing their assigned roles in a ritual that pretended tomorrow would come. The documents from Hitler's final days, particularly his political testament and personal will, provide extraordinary insight into his psychology at the end. Rather than accepting any responsibility for Germany's catastrophe, Hitler blamed everyone else with an exhaustiveness that borders on the pathological. The Jews, according to Hitler's testament, started the war and deserved their fate in the Holocaust. The generals were cowards and incompetents who failed to execute his brilliant strategies. The German people themselves lacked the strength and will necessary for the greatness he had planned for them. This complete inability to engage in self-reflection or acknowledge error is characteristic of malignant narcissism, a personality disorder that many psychologists and historians retrospectively diagnose in Hitler. Such individuals cannot accept failure as their own and must instead construct elaborate explanations that preserve their self-image by displacing blame onto others. Hitler's testament also reveals his priorities in death remained what they had been in life. His racial ideology pervaded the document, his hatred of Jews expressed with the same vehemence as in Mein Kampf 2 decades earlier, his belief in the necessity of racial purity and German expansion unshaken by the ruin these beliefs had brought. The appointment of successors showed Hitler's continued attempt to control events beyond his death. Admiral Dönitz as president and Reich Chancellor, Goebbels as chancellor, Bormann as party minister, each selection revealing Hitler's judgments about who had remained most loyal and who might continue his legacy. The practical uselessness of these appointments, given that the Reich had days to live and the appointees lacked any real power or legitimacy, didn't diminish Hitler's attention to detail in making them. Even in death, he attempted to impose his will on the future, to shape events he wouldn't live to see, to maintain the illusion of control that had sustained him throughout his rule. His personal will distributed his possessions to subordinates and to the Nazi Party, specified that his art collection should go to a museum in Linz, the Austrian city of his youth, and explained his decision to marry Eva and die with her in Berlin, The tone throughout is self-pitying and grandiose simultaneously, presenting Hitler as a martyr destroyed by lesser men's weakness and treachery, while also positioning himself as a man of destiny, making his final exit from the historical stage. The military situation on April 30th made clear that the end was hours away, not days. Soviet forces had reached the Reichstag, less than 400 meters from the bunker, and were systematically clearing the government quarter building by building, room by room. The sounds of battle were immediate and constant. Machine gun fire echoed through the streets, tank cannons fired at close range, grenades exploded in the Chancellery building itself, and small arms fire created a constant crackling backdrop to the bunker's final hours. General Weidling's morning briefing painted a picture of absolute military collapse. Ammunition was exhausted, fuel gone, communications cut, units dissolved into individuals or small groups trying to survive, and any coordinated defense impossible. Weidling himself would later testify that by April 30th, Berlin's defense existed only in the technical sense that some Germans were still shooting. There was no strategy, no reserves, no hope of relief, and no possibility of anything but surrender or death. Hitler received this information with a calmness that seemed to relieve him. The decision was made, the alternatives exhausted, and the only remaining question was the timing and method of his death. His methodical preparations for suicide reveal both his desire for control over this final act and his fear that it might somehow be bungled, leaving him alive and in Soviet hands. He had discussed with subordinates at length the best methods, expressing particular concern that he not be captured alive or have his body displayed as Mussolini's had been. The decision to use both cyanide and gunshot, belt and suspenders as the expression goes, reflected this anxiety about failure. If the poison worked, the gun was unnecessary, but if for some reason the cyanide didn't act quickly enough, the gunshot would ensure death. Hitler's testing of the cyanide on his beloved dog Blondie, a German shepherd who had been his constant companion, has been interpreted by some historians as cruel and by others as practical. Unable to test the poison on himself obviously, and needing assurance that the capsules provided by Himmler, now revealed as a traitor, actually contained lethal poison and not some substitute, Hitler had Professor Werner Hasse, a physician, administer a capsule to Blondie while he watched. The dog died quickly, confirming the poison's effectiveness but also removing one of the few creatures Hitler seems to have genuinely loved in his final days. Witnesses describe Hitler as visibly distressed by Blondie's death, more emotional than he had been about human casualties, perhaps because the dog's loyalty had been pure and unquestioning in a way that human loyalty had proven not to be. After Blondie's death, Hitler ordered the dog's puppies, born just weeks earlier in the bunker, also destroyed, as if he couldn't bear to leave any living thing he cared about to uncertain fate in a post-Nazi world. The final farewells on April 30th proceeded with Germanic formality despite the chaos. Staff members lined up in the narrow corridor outside Hitler's quarters, and the Führer moved down the line shaking hands, making eye contact, sometimes muttering a few words of thanks or farewell. Witnesses described the scene as emotionally charged, with some people openly weeping, others maintaining rigid military bearing, and Hitler himself appearing strangely peaceful, almost serene, as if unburdened by the decision to end his life. Traudl Junge, one of the secretaries, later recalled Hitler's hand as soft and cold during that farewell, his grip weak, his eyes distant. She had the impression of shaking hands with someone already partially departed from the world. After the farewells, around 3:30 p.m. on April 30th, Hitler and Eva retired to their suite and closed the door, leaving instructions that they should not be disturbed. The small group waiting outside, including Goebbels, Bormann, Ling, and a few others, stood in tense silence, checking watches, avoiding eye contact, waiting for the gunshot that would signal the end. When it came, witnesses variously described it as surprisingly loud given the concrete walls or muffled depending on where they stood. There was a moment of frozen hesitation. Then Ling and Bormann entered the suite to find the scene that would be analyzed and discussed for decades to come. The suicide room, Hitler's sitting room in the Führerbunker's private quarters, was small and Spartan, furnished with the couch where the bodies were found, a desk, chairs, and little else. The walls were bare concrete painted white, the floor covered with a simple carpet now blood-stained, and the overall effect was of a space inhabited but not personalized, a temporary accommodation that had become a tomb. Hitler's body slumped on the right side of the couch, his head tilted downward, a small bullet wound in his right temple, blood running down his face and staining his uniform, the pistol fallen to the floor beside him. Eva sat on the left side, no visible injuries, her blue dress arranged neatly, her face peaceful in death, the smell of bitter almonds indicating cyanide poisoning. The witness's immediate reaction was practical rather than emotional. There was no time for contemplation or mourning as Soviet forces were blocks away and closing, so the focus shifted immediately to carrying out Hitler's final orders regarding the disposition of his body. The removal of the bodies up the narrow stairs to the garden required multiple trips and exposed the handlers to Soviet sniper fire and artillery. They wrapped both corpses in blankets, Hitler's body noticeably stiff and heavier than expected, Eva's lighter and more easily managed, carrying them through the bunker corridors that had been Hitler's prison and now served as his route to his pyre. The emergency exit from the bunker opened into the Reich Chancellery garden, once an immaculate formal space with manicured lawns and flower beds, now a cratered moonscape of shell holes, fallen masonry, and debris. Finding a suitable spot for the cremation required locating a shell crater not filled with water, close enough to the bunker entrance for quick access but exposed enough to provide ventilation for the fire. The jerry cans of gasoline, stockpiled specifically for this purpose, represented a precious resource in fuel-starved Berlin, but Hitler had insisted that burning was non-negotiable, that his body must not fall into enemy hands intact. Estimates suggest nearly 200 liters of gasoline were used in the attempted cremation, fuel that could have powered vehicles or generators but was instead devoted to destroying evidence of Hitler's death. The actual burning proceeded in multiple stages over several hours. Ling poured gasoline directly on the bodies in their crater, struck a match, and threw it from a safe distance, the gasoline igniting with a whoosh that sent flames several meters into the air. The witnesses, standing at the bunker entrance about 3 meters away, gave the Nazi salute as the flames consumed their Führer, a final gesture of loyalty or perhaps simply the automatic response of people conditioned to ritual. They watched for several minutes, then retreated into the bunker as Soviet artillery fire intensified, returning periodically to add more gasoline and keep the fire burning. The process of cremation, even with abundant fuel and repeated applications, is incomplete under such field conditions. Modern cremation requires sustained temperatures exceeding 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit in a controlled environment, impossible to achieve in an open crater with gasoline as fuel. What remained after the burning was thus not ash but partially consumed corpses, charred and shrunken but still recognizable as human remains, with identifiable features including Hitler's distinctive mustache and dental work. This incomplete cremation would later allow Soviet investigators to identify the remains through dental records when they excavated the burial site days later. The burial of the remains around 6 p.m. on April 30th was hasty and crude. The charred bodies were rolled into a nearby shell hole and covered with loose earth and rubble, the location memorized but not marked. No ceremony performed beyond the basic act of concealment. Above ground, the battle for Berlin continued without pause for Hitler's death. Soviet soldiers fighting toward the bunker had no idea that their primary target had just committed suicide meters away, and German defenders had no general announcement of the Führer's death that might have prompted earlier surrender. This information vacuum meant that men continued to die in combat for a leader who no longer lived, fighting for a regime that had effectively ended, their sacrifices rendered even more futile by the fact that the war's outcome had long been determined regardless of Hitler's fate. Inside the bunker, the immediate aftermath of the suicide saw a mixture of relief, grief, shock, and calculation as different individuals processed the event according to their own psychology and interests. Goebbels, the true believer, prepared for his own family's murder-suicide, seeing no point in existence without Hitler and National Socialism. Bormann, the political operative, immediately began positioning himself for whatever came next, attempting to negotiate with Dönitz about the succession and considering his own escape options. The military officers, freed from Hitler's delusional directives, began practical discussions about surrender terms and how to minimize further casualties. The younger staff members, particularly the secretaries and domestic servants, found themselves confronting the reality that they were now expendable, that the protection of working for the Führer had evaporated, and that they needed to decide quickly whether to attempt escape or accept Soviet capture. The bunker's atmosphere shifted dramatically after Hitler's death, as if a malevolent presence had been removed. People spoke more freely, moved less cautiously, and began openly discussing survival rather than victory. The suicide of Hitler meant different things to different audiences when news finally spread beyond the bunker. For fanatical Nazis, it was the martyrdom of their leader, dying heroically in his capital rather than fleeing or surrendering, a narrative they would promote in post-war neo-Nazi mythology. For ordinary Germans, exhausted by years of war, bombing, deprivation, and loss, it meant the end was finally arriving, that the war would conclude and survival might become possible. Many Germans learned of Hitler's death only when Admiral Dönitz announced it via radio on May 1st, describing the Führer as having fallen fighting to his last breath against Bolshevism, a lie that served political purposes but fooled few informed listeners. For the Allies, Hitler's suicide was simultaneously satisfying as evidence of Nazi defeat and frustrating as it meant there would be no trial, no public accounting, no opportunity for victims to confront their tormentor. The absence of Hitler at Nuremberg left a void in the proceedings, as the chief architect of Nazi crimes, the justice system entirely through death. For the Soviet forces fighting toward the bunker, confirmation of Hitler's death wouldn't come for days, as they had to physically discover and identify the remains, a process complicated by Soviet leadership's paranoia and desire to control the narrative. Stalin's refusal to publicly confirm Hitler's death for years served his geopolitical interests but also fueled conspiracy theories that persist to this day. The Goebbels family murder-suicide on May 1st stands as perhaps the most horrifying coda to the bunker story, a crime that reveals the ultimate logic of totalitarian ideology taken to its conclusion. If the ideology is everything and the ideology has failed, then life itself becomes meaningless and even children are better off dead than living in a world without the ideology. Magda Goebbels, a fervent Nazi who had been awarded the Mother's Cross for bearing 6 children, spent the afternoon of May 1st preparing her children for death, dressing them in white nightgowns, possibly telling them they were going to receive medicine or be protected from danger.